People think the difference between winners and losers is talent. It isn't. The real difference is whether you can control your fear and your urge to react, especially when you are being provoked by someone smaller than you, meaner than you, and more dangerous than you want to admit. Look at the story you were taught in school: a battlefield, a clever general, a dramatic betrayal. But here's the uncomfortable truth underneath. The person who changed the history of an entire era did not win by being loud. He won by being patient and by treating emotion like an illness you cannot afford to catch. This video is about Sima Yi, a man who didn't rush, not because he was weak, because he understood something most people refuse to understand about power, relationships, money, and identity. He understood that the highest form of patience is not passivity, it's strategy, and it's also a kind of psychological courage. Sima Yi comes from the kind of aristocratic background where everyone pretends to be honorable while calculating your failure in the margins. In the chaos of the Three Kingdoms, everyone was fighting for unity, for survival, for legacy. Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Sun Quan, decades of conflict, and yet the final outcome, the one who ended up consolidating the next era, was Sima Yi. Not the loudest, not the most popular, not the one with the best battlefield reputation, the one who waited, measured, and controlled himself until other people built the opening for him. Now, before you roll your eyes and tell yourself this is ancient history, stop. Because the psychology is identical to your life right now. You are not living in a court, you are living in systems. You deal with bosses, exes, friends who smile while they harvest your vulnerability, companies that use your labor as leverage, and platforms that reward your anger. The arena is different. The mechanism is the same. The uncomfortable question is this: when someone provokes you, what happens inside you? Do you feel the heat rise in your chest and you start searching for a weapon? Do you start rewriting the story to make yourself the hero of the next conflict? Do you secretly hope that if you react fast enough, the world will finally respect you? Sima Yi would call that hope a trap. He would call it emotional gambling, the kind that ruins your future while feeding your ego for a few seconds. Let's go deeper. Sima Yi's mind worked like an internal court. It ruled itself before it ever tried to rule others. In his world, one of the greatest threats was not an open enemy. It was a politically dangerous fool, the kind of person who thinks he's in control because he's loud, because he's confident, because he enjoys humiliating others. There was a time when Cao Sang took over the situation with reckless aggression. He didn't just govern, he humiliated, he trapped the mechanisms of power. He used people like tools and treated the imperial structure like furniture that could be moved around for convenience. He even pushed Guo Taiho out of the palace, and he used entertainers connected to the enemy emperor as personal amusement. He took authority in a way that wasn't just practical, it was vulgar, it was shameless. And here's the critical psychological point: when a person behaves like that, they are not only making enemies outside, they are attracting consequences inside their own system. They are training loyalists to feel disgust. They are giving everyone permission to stop pretending. Most people respond to humiliation by wanting to destroy the humiliator immediately. They want justice like a fire. But Sima Yi understood a different kind of justice. He understood that the fastest way to win is sometimes to stop playing the game the other person wants to play. A student of his, Zhonghui, tried to intervene. The student essentially said, "Teacher, why are you sitting in that position of respect without real power? Why don't you do something?" The tone matters. It wasn't concern. It was impatience with slow outcomes. It was ambition dressed as advice. And Sima Yi corrected him in a way that exposes the student's hidden desire. The student wasn't actually worried about the state. He was trying to use the teacher's restraint as a ladder to his own rise. He wanted a fight because fighting validates him. Sima Yi used an example: Yang Xiu. Yang Xiu was known for provoking Cao Cao through clever language and tactical psychological pressure. It looked intelligent. It looked like strategy. But in the end, it caused retaliation and destruction. Yang Xiu's talent wasn't the problem. His relationship to power was the problem. He treated the enemy like an intellectual opponent instead of a threat that could crush him. The lesson isn't don't speak. The lesson is don't confuse cleverness with safety. In political life and in personal life, There are people whose reactions are not proportional to your logic. They react to your existence. They react to your audacity. They react to your ability to make them look smaller. And when you are dealing with that kind of person, the worst move is to feed their need for control. If you give them an excuse to act, they will act, because your reaction becomes their fuel. Sima Yi's philosophy was harsh but clear. He believed you must not be cowardly, but you must also know fear. Ah, not fear as weakness, fear as realism. The kind of fear that says, this opponent is capable, unpredictable, and close enough to hurt me, so I will not offer myself to their impulse. That is leadership at its deepest level, because it requires you to admit something you would rather deny. Your plans are not stronger than your emotions. Even brilliant people ruin themselves when they believe their feelings are facts. In modern life, this shows up everywhere. In relationships, you meet someone who pushes your boundaries with little tests. They act cold, they disappear, they flirt with chaos, and then they watch you for a reaction. Most people react by chasing. They send extra messages. They become apologetic. They start negotiating their own worth. Sima Yi would not chase. He would measure. He would let the other person reveal themselves. He would wait for the moment when their own behavior exposes their true character to everyone around them. In money, it looks like this. You see a risky opportunity. Someone says you should move fast. Someone pressures you to decide before you fully understand the costs. The voice in your head says, don't miss out. Your fear of loss tries to masquerade as ambition. You end up making a bad decision because you wanted control over your anxiety, not control over your future. Sima Yi's patient logic would tell you, don't confuse speed with progress. Do not let the timeline of your fear become the timeline of your destruction. But we're not done. Sima Yi's patience wasn't only about waiting, it was about emotional discipline. He was a master of restraint. He didn't eliminate emotion, he controlled it. He treated emotion like an instrument that must be tuned, not like a driver that must be obeyed. He asked himself, what resources do I have? What timing exists? What can I anticipate? When is the time ready, not just when the urge is ready? In other words, he didn't ask, how do I feel right now? He asked, what is rational given the full timeline? That's why his strategy could survive contact with reality. Most people don't fail because they lack plans. They fail because their plans are built on unstable feelings. Now here comes the part that makes the story feel almost unbearable. Cao Sang and his loyalist, Ha Yin, tightened control so aggressively that it wasn't just political. It was humiliating for the traditional structure. They acted like they were permanent. They acted like they could violate norms without consequences. Their biggest mistake was that they treated opposition as if it was stupidity. They assumed the people around them were too weak to unite. They assumed they could squeeze the imperial figurehead and still manage the legitimacy machine. Then they pushed Guo Taiho out of the palace again, treating the symbols of authority as disposable. This is the psychological pattern of many modern abusers too. They attack symbols of dignity first. They don't need to steal your money at the beginning. They need to make you accept degradation so later your compliance will feel normal. In Sima Yi's world, one of Cao Sang's moves pushed a nerve in Sima Zhao, his own opponent from the same family sphere. When Sima Zhao complained to his father that Cao Sang's actions were intolerable, Sima Yi responded with a question that cut through morality to strategy. He asked, how does Cao Sang compare to Zhuge Liang? In other words, he forced his son to stop thinking like a righteous citizen and start thinking like a leader. Cao Sang was not Zhuge Liang. Cao Sang was a worm in the system, not because he wasn't dangerous, but because he lacked the depth, the discipline, and the long-term intelligence to truly control the future. Then Sima Yi gave the line that should be tattooed on every nervous person's brain. Don't confront a fool like it will satisfy your pride. If you are fighting a fool, you risk becoming foolish yourself. This is the psychology of ego. When you get provoked by someone beneath your expected standards, you feel offended. You feel the urge to correct reality. You feel that if you don't retaliate, you will be disrespected forever. But Sima Yi knew a brutal truth. Your anger is an admission of weakness, not weakness of character, weakness of control. You are telling the world, my internal system is so fragile that your behavior can hijack it. And the reason that matters is simple. When you lose control of your mind, you lose control of your actions. And when your actions become emotional, other people can predict and manipulate you. Sima Yi understood something that many therapy clients also learn too late. You cannot claim you want freedom while your nervous system keeps obeying the provocations of whoever has the loudest button. Then the most important line arrives. He told his son to learn to bow before a fool. In modern language, that means you stop performing. You stop giving the fool a stage. You stop insisting. Your opponent must understand your dignity. You let the fool reveal his own nature. You let the system adjust to the fool, and you wait until the foolishness becomes an opening. This sounds almost passive. It isn't. It's active intelligence. It's you using time like a weapon. And then reality proved him right. Cao Song thought he could manage power for a long time. He thought he could concentrate authority without triggering a structural backlash. He misjudged the patience of opponents and the timing of consequences. The fool eventually created conditions where Sima Yi could move. That's the highest level of patience, not waiting for your comfort, not waiting for your enemies to stop, waiting for your enemies to complete their own destruction. Now, if you're thinking, this is cold, this is manipulative, this is ruthless, good, that means you are finally looking at the parts of yourself that want to be ethical only when it is convenient. Here's the dark truth. Many people claim they hate manipulation while they secretly depend on moral excuses to justify their own manipulation. They dress up revenge as justice. They dress up control as boundaries. They dress up obsession as care. They dress up chaos as truth. Sima Yi did something different. He didn't pretend his actions were pure. He pretended his actions were effective. He didn't waste energy on moral theater. He used psychological reality. Now let's talk about something that most viewers miss because it's uncomfortable. Sima Yi didn't treat enemies like monsters. He treated them like variables. He even had a philosophy about enemies and friends that destroys a lot of modern fantasies. When Cao Cao asked about Yang Xiu and conflict, Sima Yi answered with an unexpected tone. He said he didn't have enemies. The people he met were friends and teachers. That's not a cute proverb. That's a survival strategy. If you label someone as an enemy, you turn them into a story. Stories make you sentimental. Stories make you react. Stories make you refuse to adapt. If you label someone as a teacher, you stay analytical. You ask, what is this person telling me about the world? What risk does their behavior represent? What patterns are they showing? This is what most people cannot do. They need enemies because enemies justify their anger. They need villains because villains make them feel righteous. They need the narrative because the narrative covers their fear. Sima Yi eliminated that cover. He stayed clear. That clarity is what let him keep relationships around him stable even as he played long games. You might be wondering, how could he have no enemies if his opponents wanted him destroyed? Because he probably understood the difference between conflict and hatred. Not all conflict requires hatred. Not all opposition requires revenge. In modern terms, it means you can disagree without turning the person into a demon. You can leave without needing to burn bridges for emotional closure. You can protect yourself without performing the role of the victim forever. Now, Sima Yi's two main threats are also a psychological mirror. One was Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang was the national-level enemy, the one who truly had strategic depth. The other was Cao Cao. The point is not that these were great generals. The point is that Sima Yi understood the nature of threat. Zhuge Liang wasn't threatening because he was angry. He was threatening because he had an actual plan and operational capability. Cao Cao wasn't threatening because he was emotional. He was threatening because he saw risk and controlled outcomes. And Sima Yi survived them for a reason. He hid his ambition too well. Most people don't realize how ambition works psychologically. Ambition has a vibe. It leaks. You can see it in the way someone talks, the way someone takes credit, the way someone tries to force attention, the way someone keeps references to destiny and my potential like it's an excuse for entitlement. Sima Yi hid his ambition so effectively that Cao Cao only reached suspicion, not certainty. That means Sima Yi didn't just strategize externally. He managed his personal signals. He controlled his mouth. He controlled his posture. He avoided giving people proof they could use. This is exactly what happens when you want to be promoted at work, but you keep acting like you are dying for validation. The manager notices. They might not hate you, but they label you as a risk. And then you spend your entire career playing defense against the suspicion you created with your own intensity. Sima Yi avoided intensity. He avoided excess. He kept his ambition quiet until timing made it safe. That's also why people around him treated him like a friend. The text describes that those familiar with him saw him as someone they could rely on. His generals stayed loyal. Even those associated with the state, but not fully aligned with his camp, often stood up for him. How? Because emotional safety builds loyalty. If you are volatile, people hesitate. If you are predictable, people trust. If you treat others with respect when you don't have to, you disarm their fear. And when your power grows, people don't panic, they rationally adjust. Now we reach the next lesson, and it's where the story becomes almost personal. After Zhuge Liang died, Sima Yi visited the camp, exchanged respect, and honored Zhuge Liang directly. He took the symbolic position of respect, using his identity and his authority to communicate restraint rather than dominance. If he wasn't a master of internal discipline, he would have done the opposite. He would have celebrated too loudly. He would have made it about himself. He would have turned the funeral into a stage. But he didn't. He showed that he could honor an enemy without surrendering strategy. This matters because it teaches you what leadership really is. Leadership is not screaming that you are strong. Leadership is proving you can absorb complexity without losing control of your ego. If you want a modern translation, here it is. You can respect someone you outplayed, and you can still be dangerous to them. You can keep dignity while you plan your next move. You can be calm without being weak. Most people believe strength requires hostility. It doesn't. Hostility is often a mask for insecurity. Sima Yi had something else. He had the ability to see talent objectively. He admired capability and learned from it, regardless of whether it belonged to an enemy or an ally. This is hard for people because it forces you to confront your own hidden bias. Many people only respect talent when it serves their tribe. When talent threatens them, they either demonize it or pretend it doesn't exist. Sima Yi refused to do that. He saw the person, he saw the skill, he treated skill like skill. Now, the story shifts to education of his sons, and this is where the hidden self theme becomes unavoidable. His sons were angry about failure. A major defeat happened under Zhuge Liang's pressure. The people couldn't accept that such strong forces lost. His sons also couldn't accept it because their ego wanted victory now. They went to confront Sima Yi, expecting him to explain how a stronger army could lose. They expected a motivational speech that would restore pride. Instead, Sima Yi taught them to learn how to lose. He told them that if you only want to win, you might not become the true winner in the end. You must learn to lose without losing logic. You must learn to lose without losing calm. Only then can you reach a future outcome. This is an emotional skill disguised as a military rule. In relationships, people cannot tolerate losing face, so they punish, they escalate, they rewrite history so they look right. They do it because they are afraid that if they admit a loss, they will lose identity. In work, people cannot tolerate a failed project. So they hide mistakes, blame others, and then repeat the pattern until the organization collapses. In money, people cannot tolerate financial disappointment. So they chase risky recovery, doubling down emotionally rather than analyzing reality. Sima Yi's teaching is simple and brutal. Failure is not only a risk, failure is training. The problem is that most people are not ready to be trained. They are ready to be praised. They want comfort. They want control of feelings. They don't want the discipline of reality. Sima Yi made failure a teacher instead of a shame. He taught patience with disappointment. That's why his sons eventually calmed down and understood his strategy of stillness. He used the defeat to educate. That's the hidden mechanism. You can convert pain into skill, but only if you stop treating pain as proof that you are doomed. Now we should talk about why this video matters for you in 2026, not for some ancient dynasty. Because we live in a world that feeds emotional addiction. Social media is basically a factory that turns every insult into a dopamine event. Every conflict becomes content. Every outrage becomes a currency. People don't just want opinions anymore. They want enemies they can fight in the comments. And when your nervous system is trained to crave reaction, patience becomes unfamiliar. Waiting becomes painful. Quiet becomes suspicious. But Sima Yi's entire existence is a rejection of that addiction. He waits until time itself becomes a weapon. He refuses to give the enemy what they need to push him into mistakes. He treats his emotions like a resource, not a boss. So when you feel the urge to post, to argue, to clear your name, to retaliate, to confront someone who already decided you are a target, ask yourself, is this action solving a real problem, or is it feeding a hidden need to feel powerful right now? If it's feeding the need, you will lose. You will lose time. You will lose credibility. You will lose leverage. And later you will tell yourself a story about how the world was unfair. It wasn't unfair, it was predictable. Your reaction gave the other side the timeline they wanted. Now, the story about why Cao Cao, Cao Pi, and Cao Rui did not eliminate Sima Yi is also a psychological lesson. They suspected him. They were cautious. They didn't trust him. They had reason to believe he would become a future threat. So why didn't they just kill him? First, because Cao Pi protected him. Think about this for a second. Even when the father had strong reasons to act, the son created a protective barrier. That means Sima Yi had relationships that mattered. He wasn't isolated. He wasn't universally hated. His presence had alliances attached. Second, Sima Yi's official position was too low to be an immediate threat. Most people confuse suspicion with certainty. Leaders need evidence. If you are not in a position to act, you might be labeled suspicious but not actionable. Third, Cao Pi needed the Sima family influence to balance the imperial household. This shows another uncomfortable truth. In systems, even threats can be useful. Power structures use talent and influence as balance weights. They do not always destroy what they fear. They manage what they fear, because destroying creates vacuum, and vacuum creates chaos. Fourth, later under Cao Rui, Sima Yi became essential to defense. He was needed to stop threats from Shu and Wu. The point isn't that leaders are kind. The point is that leaders behave strategically. They decide based on resources, not emotion. So Sima Yi survived not because opponents were blind, and not because he was lucky. He survived because he fit into the logic of the system long enough to let the system carry him forward. This is how hidden self-people often rise too, but it requires patience and restraint, not fantasy. Now, the final transition in the story is about the rise itself. After Cao Rui died, the next ruler was too young to command real authority. Another family member, Cao Shuang, lacked capability. The system became unstable, and the person with the most disciplined long-term strategy moved at the right time. This is the last lesson. Timing is not just about waiting. Timing is about being ready while other people are improvising. If you build your character slowly and keep your emotions regulated, you can move when the opening arrives. If you build only your ego, you will be ready to react but not ready to lead. Now let's zoom into something that many viewers will resist. Sima Yi's patience was not passive. It required discipline, and discipline requires a certain kind of identity. He couldn't be the kind of person who needs instant validation. He couldn't be the kind of person who confuses immediate relief with long-term victory. Most people are stuck because their identity depends on immediate outcomes. They want messages answered quickly. They want relationships stabilized immediately. They want bosses to appreciate them now. They want money to feel safe now. They want clarity now. They want certainty now. But real life is delayed. Real life is systems, inertia, and delayed consequence. If your identity cannot survive delay, you will sabotage your own rise. This is the hidden self, the part of you that believes you will die emotionally if you are not seen, if you are not chosen, if you are not respected in the timeline you demanded. Sima Yi trained the opposite. He trained himself to be able to sit in discomfort without turning it into action that makes him smaller. That is what he modeled, the courage to be patient with your own nervous system. Now, we need to make the call to action, but it cannot be empty, so here it is, without sugar. Stop romanticizing your anger. Stop calling your urge to retaliate standing up for yourself. In many cases, it's just fear searching for control. When someone provokes you, you have two choices. You can feed the provocation, making it your story, or you can observe without obeying. That second choice will feel like you are losing, but you are actually preserving your leverage. Today, practice a rule Sima Yi would respect. Before you respond to any insult, any coldness, any manipulation, you will ask one question only. What does this reaction change in the real world? Not in your head, in the real world. If the answer is nothing, don't do it. If the answer is that you are doing it to feel powerful, to punish, to regain pride, then you already know the truth. You are trading future stability for temporary emotional relief. That trade is always a loss. Second, stop trying to find certainty in unstable systems. Many people chase closure like it's a right. They demand a conversation that cannot happen. They demand an apology that will not come. They demand a clear explanation from someone who survives on ambiguity. Sima Yi survived by refusing to demand what the system couldn't give at the time it wasn't ready to give it. He waited, and waiting turned the unknown into evidence. In your life, that means you don't chase people who benefit from confusion. You collect data, you look at patterns, you watch what they do when you are not performing. You watch consistency, not words. Third, when you fail, do not convert failure into shame. Convert it into information. If you lost, ask what you missed. Ask what your enemy revealed. Ask what part of your process was weak, and then adjust. Most people do the opposite. They lose and then they become spiritual, dramatic, and self-pitying. They turn failure into identity, and once failure becomes identity, they stop learning. Sima Yi taught his sons that losing without losing logic is what keeps you eligible for future victory. That sentence should haunt you in a good way, because the harsh truth is that many people are not blocked by lack of talent. They are blocked by unwillingness to process discomfort without turning it into rebellion against reality. So rise and stand up, but do it like a strategist, not like a child stomping its feet. Be patient with your disappointment. Be respectful without surrendering your boundaries. Learn from enemies. Don't label everything as hatred just to make yourself feel alive. And when fools provoke you, do not give them the satisfaction of hijacking your mind. The darkest honest takeaway is this. If you cannot control your emotion, you will become controlled by someone else's strategy. Your reaction will be their opening. The highest courage is not fighting first. It is waiting until you can fight without breaking yourself. Now your move. The next time you feel the heat, the next time you want to send a message, the next time you want to expose someone, the next time you want to prove you're right, pause. Count not seconds, but consequences. Ask what your reaction builds, and then decide whether you are acting to grow or acting to satisfy a wounded ego. Rise up, not through noise, through discipline, through timing, through the patience that scares your enemies because it has no immediate payoff for them and no immediate cost for you.